The barbecue in the neighboring yard had long since burned out, but the coals under Valerie Peterson's smoker were still alive. Crimson, hot, with the kind of even heat that only comes with patience. She knew how to wait. That, perhaps, was the one thing life had truly taught her. To wait, and then to take what was hers. Quickly, without unnecessary words, while others were still hesitating. May had turned out to be the kind of month you see on postcards. A sky without a single cloud. The scent of new leaves on the pine trees beyond the fence, the heavy, purple lilacs by the neighbor's gate. The lake community of Pine Ridge was living its unhurried life. Somewhere a hammer was tapping, and far down the street, children were laughing. A cyclist with a basket on his handlebars rode down the main lane. It was the kind of perfect moment you want to show people. And Valerie was showing it. On the table under the apple tree stood chilled bottles of beer, sweating in the heat, and a platter of smoked brisket that had been in the smoker for hours. Real, quality meat, not some store-bought cut of unknown origin. There were sliced vegetables, bunches of herbs straight from the garden, and a potato salad she had made that morning and covered with plastic wrap to keep it fresh. The tablecloth was linen with an embroidered edge, one she saved for special occasions. Today was a special occasion. 3 guests had arrived. Ingrid Vance, her best friend, a friend from the days when they both worked in the same office building and ate lunch at the same cafeteria. And 2 women from the Homeowners Association, Tony and Rachel, with whom Valerie had become friends a few years ago at a general meeting where they voted on repairing the community gate. They were great listeners, always ready with a compliment and knew not to interrupt a good story. And they both possessed that special gift of being genuinely surprised by other people's stories, even ones they had heard before. Valerie had come up to the lake house on Friday, alone, on the commuter train with 2 heavy bags. On Saturday morning, she washed the porch, wiped the windows, and pulled the patio furniture out of the shed, arranging it so the apple tree cast its shade directly over the table, not the path. Her neighbor, Claudia, leaned over the fence and said, "You're bustling around like a young woman today, Val." Valerie said something about the fresh air, but the truth was different. She was in a good mood, a rare, solid mood of a person who has finally put everything in its place. On Sunday morning, she went to the farmer's market in the nearby town. People sold produce from the backs of their trucks on weekends, and she bought the brisket from a butcher she knew and trusted. While the meat was in its rub salt, black pepper, a little paprika, a touch of brown sugar, she started the batter for a coffee cake, chopped potatoes, and made the salad. Then she sat on the porch, drank a cup of tea, and called Ingrid. "Come over for lunch, and bring Tony and Rachel if you can get a hold of them. I've got something to tell you. I've got something to tell you." In Valerie's mouth, that phrase always meant one thing, a story worth the trip. Ingrid, having spent 40 years by her side as a best friend, knew that intonation by heart. She arranged it with Tony. Tony called Rachel, and by 1 in the afternoon, all 3 were on the train with bags, bringing a pie and some strawberries. Ingrid sat at Valerie's right hand and praised the brisket for the 3rd time. She was a large woman with a cheerful face and a habit of saying whatever was on her mind, which in some company was a virtue, and in others, a disaster. Today, Valerie was controlling the conversation, and Ingrid sensed it, listening more than she spoke. "It's so nice at our lake house now," Valerie said, gesturing around the yard like a proprietor who had just completed a years-long project. "Isn't it, girls? The air, the quiet, all of it ours. We finally got that vulture out of our lives, and it's like we can breathe again." Tony put her fork down. "So, she's really locked up? Is it a conviction already?" "For now, she's just in custody." Valerie shrugged slightly, as if they were discussing something trivial, a household matter. "The investigation is ongoing, but with a case like this, with those amounts of money, with that many victims, she's not getting out of it. Her lawyer is good, of course. But good lawyers are only good when there's some basis for a defense. And here." She paused, filled her glass, and shook her head with a look of deep regret. "Here, there's no basis. It's terrifying to think about," Rachel said. "So many years, right beside you, and a story like this. How's Alex taking it?" "Alex is holding up." Valerie's voice warmed. "He's a strong boy, takes after me. He's upset, of course, they were together for 7 years, after all. But I'm here for him. I'm always here for him." Ingrid reached for some greens and, without looking up from her plate, asked, "And how did you even find out what she'd been signing on all those documents?" It was an innocent question. A friend who just wanted the whole story. With all the details. But Valerie took a fraction of a second longer to answer than was necessary. "The detective told me." When they arrested Megan, they called me in too, as a family member. They explained everything. The documents, the signatures, the sums, it's all clean. I mean, for the investigation, it's all clean. A solid evidentiary basis. She took another sip of wine. I was in shock, of course. Who would have thought? So quiet, so proper. The quiet ones are always the most dangerous, Rachel concluded with authority. Exactly. Valerie agreed and added with feeling, 200 people. More than 200. Retirees, mind you. People who brought their life savings. Tony shook her head. Ingrid set her fork aside. A particular silence fell over the table, the kind that happens when a story turns truly bad. Not the kind of bad you can wash down with wine, but a real bad, the kind that gives you a slight chill even on a warm May day. The brisket smoked, the pine trees behind the fence rustled. 3 weeks ago, the morning had begun the way mornings you remember for the rest of your life always begin. Completely ordinary. Megan woke up at 6:30. She always woke up at 6:30, even on weekends. Her body didn't know how to do it any other way. She made coffee, opened her laptop, read 2 emails from colleagues on the West Coast, and closed it. She stood by the window. It was gray and damp outside. April in New York City knows how to be unpleasant, and this April was trying its best. Alex was still asleep. He always slept later than she did. Big, warm, taking up 3/4 of the bed and never noticing. Megan sometimes watched him in the mornings with a tenderness that is never spoken aloud. She just looked and thought something unformed, something good. The doorbell rang at 7:12 a.m. A delivery, she thought. She had ordered something for the apartment last week. They had promised to deliver it in the morning. She set down her cup, threw on a robe, and went to open the door. 3 people were standing there. 2 in plain clothes, a man in his 40s and a younger woman. A third, in uniform, stood slightly to the side. The man in plain clothes held a folded piece of paper. Megan Zimmerman? He asked. Yes. Detective Cromwell, Economic Crimes Division. He showed his badge, without rushing, clearly, so she could read it. This is a warrant for your arrest. Please read it. Megan took the paper and read it. She read it a second time, slowly, from the beginning. Cromwell watched her. He had seen it all. Some people screamed. Some slammed the door and tried to call a lawyer through the crack. One person had fainted right on the threshold. This woman in the beige robe was reading the warrant for her own arrest the way one reads a complex contract. Attentively, without any wasted motion. May I get my bag? She asked when she had finished. Yes, Cromwell said. We'll wait. She turned and saw Alex. He was standing in the hallway in dark gray sweatpants, looking at her. Over his shoulder, a little farther back by the living room door, stood his mother. Valerie had arrived the night before, citing some business she had in the city, and stayed overnight. Now she stood there, silent. And in her silence, there was something. Megan felt it, though she didn't have time to understand what it was. She would understand later. Later. She would have a lot of time to understand. Alex, she said evenly. Call Arthur King right now. Alex nodded mechanically, like a person who has just been hit and hasn't yet realized with what. Megan went into the bedroom and returned 4 minutes later, having changed her robe for slacks and a sweater. She grabbed a small bag. It contained her phone, a charger, her ID, and some cash. She had packed it quickly and without fuss, because for those moments when life takes a sharp turn, a smart person always has a mental checklist. At the door, she stopped and looked at her husband. He was standing in the same spot, phone in his hand. Call him, she repeated. Calmly, almost softly. And then she was gone. The hallway smelled of fresh paint. The building management had finally repainted the common areas, something they had been asking for 3 years. Megan noticed it automatically, because in extreme situations, the brain latches onto the most random details. Yellow walls. New railings, the number 5 on the 5th floor, painted slightly crookedly. She would remember this for a long time. The smell of paint and the crooked number. Cromwell walked beside her, slightly behind. He didn't hold her arm, didn't push her. He walked the way you walk beside someone you trust to walk on their own. She noticed that, too. The detective was methodical, without any unnecessary theatrics. A professional. You could work with professionals. Valerie watched her go. On her face, there was no fear, no sympathy, no confusion. There was something else. Something Alex didn't see that morning, because he wasn't looking in the right place. More wine, Valerie offered. Ingrid held out her glass. Tony did too. Rachel covered hers with her hand. She still had to drive. So what about the lake house now? Tony asked. Is everything okay with it? The lake house is in perfect order, Valerie said with pleasure. I got it into shape last fall. Repainted the fence, put in a new greenhouse. Alex helped with the roof last May. We redid the whole thing. It's beautiful, you can see for yourselves. It was indeed beautiful. The yard was about half an acre. Old apple trees provided the right kind of shade. The garden beds were neat. The flagstone path from the gate to the porch had been laid 15 years ago, but laid properly, not a single stone had sunk. The house was small but solid. Brick walls, a screened-in porch, with young ivy climbing the railings. A good, solid lake house. Just don't tell Alex how much I've redone here, Valerie added conspiratorially. He'd just argue. Mom, why? Mom, wait. But I don't know how to wait when something needs to be done. Ingrid laughed. Tony nodded. Rachel was looking somewhere beyond the fence, at the neighbor's yard. A dogwood tree was in bloom there. Its sweet, almost dizzying scent drifted over in waves. And who's her lawyer? Ingrid asked. Is he any good? They say he's well known. Valerie didn't specify who they were. But the investigation, I'm telling you, it's all documented. Her signature on the papers, her professional credentials, it all adds up. A good lawyer needs something to work with. And Alex, how is he with all this? Tony started. He's upset. Valerie interrupted, gently but irrevocably. What do you expect? They were together for 7 years. But he's a grown man, he'll figure it out. The main thing is that the truth came out. Better now than later. She said this so convincingly, with such a sincere expression of a person who felt sorry for everyone involved, that even Ingrid, who had known her friend for 40 years, almost believed this version of events for a moment. Almost. Because in the next second, she involuntarily remembered something. A conversation from 2 years ago, when Valerie had spoken of her daughter-in-law in a completely different tone, not sympathetic, not patronizing. Back then, there was something harsh in her voice, which her friend had explained away as hurt, jealousy, a mother's instinct. Now, Ingrid couldn't quite reconcile that conversation with the current story. She didn't try. She raised her glass and took a sip. To good people, Valerie said, who know how to tell the difference between truth and lies. The glasses touched with a quiet chime. Megan spent her first few days in custody the way she usually handled complex situations at work. She thought systematically, without panic, without falling into despair. Although despair was there, of course, it hadn't gone anywhere. She had just pushed it into a corner and told it. Wait, I don't need you right now. She went through the entire body of what she knew. The Homestead Capital Fund. She had heard the name once, in passing, from an acquaintance of an acquaintance who mentioned she was planning to invest money there. Megan had said something skeptical at the time. A 40% annual return isn't an investment, it's a red flag. And she had forgotten about it. Her name and her signature, her credentials as an independent financial consultant. She had never signed anything like that. Never. She signed exactly the documents that her signature was physically on, in her own hand. And that fact was as immutable for her as the multiplication table. So, it was a forgery. A good forgery, if the investigation hadn't spotted it right away. This would require a copy of her ID, a signature sample, and someone who knew how to work with documents. She closed her eyes and began to go through the people who might have had her personal information over the past few years. The bank, her employer, the notary when she bought her car 3 years ago, a landlord from long before her marriage. And Alex. Or rather, not Alex, but people through him. She remembered it clearly, like a high-resolution image, a long-ago conversation. Her mother-in-law had asked for her personal information for some kind of insurance, something vague, explained in a hurry. Megan had said at the time that she would fill out whatever was needed herself. No need for a copy. But Alex, he had given it to her. She found out about it by chance a few weeks later. And they had talked then, not fought, talked. And Alex had promised not to pass on anything without her knowledge again. She had accepted that as a closed issue. Now, the issue was open again. She also remembered a strange document, with an unfamiliar corporate address and a complex structure. She had found it by chance among some papers her mother-in-law had once left at their house. She had put it aside, someone else's business. But she had photographed it, because the analyst in her was always bothered by strange paperwork, and she hadn't deleted the photo. For 5 years, it had been sitting in a MISC folder on her phone, along with hundreds of other pictures. That morning, she asked a guard to pass a message to the detective. She wanted to talk. More brisket. Valerie held up the platter. Where would I put it? Ingrid laughed. I'm already so full. Take it, take it. Brisket isn't heavy. That's pork that's heavy. Brisket is just right. She served, she talked, she smiled. The sun still had an hour. Then, behind the pine trees, the sky would begin to turn pink. And there would be that quiet May gold that doesn't last long, which makes it all the more beautiful. Valerie had planned this evening as a victory. Her lake house, her table, her story. She had earned this celebration. Quiet, among women, without an audience. Just 3 friends, good meat, and a truth that could finally be spoken aloud. You know what struck me the most? She said, setting down the platter. I felt it from the very beginning. From the first day, Alex brought her home. She looks at you so calmly, doesn't look away. Other daughters-in-law, they're at least a little intimidated. But not her. I thought to myself back then, something isn't right here. Well, looking at someone calmly isn't a crime, Ingrid remarked cautiously. Of course, Valerie agreed, with an intonation that meant the opposite. Of course. Just then, Rachel looked again at the neighboring yard. No one was there, just the dogwood tree and the quiet creak of an old apple tree. But beyond the community gates, something was moving. Large, dark, slow. She squinted. Val, is someone coming to see you? Valerie didn't turn around right away. She was just opening the second bottle of wine. It's probably for the neighbors. They always have guests for Memorial Day weekend. The car passed the security gate. The guard raised the barrier without a call, as if he had been warned, and it moved down the main lane. A black Lincoln Navigator with New York plates was driving unhurriedly, as if deliberately giving everyone time to see it. Tony was already watching, then Ingrid, and then Valerie raised her head too. The car stopped at her property. The silence was absolute. Even the dogwood tree seemed to stop swaying. The passenger side door opened first. A woman in a light-colored coat with neatly styled dark hair stepped onto the path. Perfectly straight, perfectly calm. She looked around, unhurriedly, like a person who wants to see a place before entering it. Then she looked at the table under the apple tree, at Valerie. Megan Zimmerman was looking at her mother-in-law in exactly the way Valerie had always hated. Without fear, without anger. Just looking. Alex got out of the car. Not a word, not a glance at his mother. He looked straight ahead, at the path. Behind him, another person in plain clothes with a folder under his arm. He was the last to close the door, and stopped by the hood. Surveying the scene. The set table, the 4 women, the almost empty bottle of wine. Ingrid opened her mouth, then closed it. Tony put down her fork exactly as she had before. Only now her hands weren't listening, and the fork clattered against the plate louder than it should have. Rachel pushed her chair back. Valerie didn't move. In her mind, what was happening was what happens to a smart person when they realize that everything they considered a win was just a bet in someone else's game. A longer, more patient game, played by rules that were not her own. Megan's heels clicked sharply on the old flagstone path. The sound was even, confident, without hesitation. She reached the yard gate, unlatched it, and walked in. She stopped 3 steps from the table and looked at the embroidered tablecloth, the glasses, the brisket, at her mother-in-law's face. Good evening, Valerie, she said. And in that greeting, there was no anger, no triumph. Just calm. The kind of calm a person has when everything has already been decided. The glass in Valerie's hand trembled. She didn't catch it in time. The dark red wine spread across the white linen tablecloth. Slowly, irrevocably, like something that cannot be stopped once it has begun. They had their wedding in September, at a country club restaurant on the shore of a reservoir, which guests reached by a chartered bus from the city or in their own cars. The weather was warm, almost summer-like. But the leaves were already yellowing at the edges, and the water had that particular smell of an autumn reservoir algae, damp stone, something slow and large. Megan would later remember that smell every time she thought of that day. A sensory anchor her brain had dropped right there, right then. There were about 80 guests. On Alex's side, they were loud, large, with many men from the construction business who could drink and talk at the same time without losing their grip on either. On Megan's side, they were quieter, fewer, mostly colleagues and a few close friends from college. The tables were arranged in a U shape. The newlyweds were in the center, everyone else on the sides. Valerie sat to the right of her son. She wore a deep burgundy dress with a large, golden brooch in the shape of a leafy branch, and her hair was styled at a salon the day before. She looked good, held herself straight, and smiled exactly the way a person smiles when they know they are being watched. The first toast was given by the father of one of Alex's old friends. Something long, touching, about family and the road ahead. Everyone applauded. Valerie took the second toast before anyone else could offer it. "I want to say something about my son," she began, and her voice was practiced, confident, with that slight tremor that skillfully mimics emotion. "I raised him alone. Without a father, without anyone's help, just the two of us. And I always knew he would be happy. I only ever wanted the best for him. I still want the best for him." A pause. A glance at her daughter-in-law. "Megan, you are part of our family now. I hope you understand how much that means." Everyone drank. Megan set down her glass and looked at her mother-in-law calmly. Alex was talking to someone on his right and took the toast as a normal, warm mother's toast. But Megan's friend, Kate, sitting 2 seats away, would later say to her in private, "Listen, did she just warn you? Or was it my imagination?" It wasn't her imagination. Half a year passed between the warning and the war. The conversation happened in October of the following year, 13 months after the wedding. Alex came home later than usual, put his briefcase down in the entryway, and said without even taking off his coat, "Mom needs our help. She's renovating her apartment and needs something else urgently. I think we should give her $8,000. Megan was at the kitchen table with her laptop. She didn't look up right away. She closed one tab, opened another, read something, then looked at her husband. "Okay," she said. "Do you want dinner?" "Yeah, let me just change." He went into the bedroom. Megan got up, heated up soup, and set the table. When he returned and sat down, she placed a sheet of paper next to his bowl, neatly printed, with even lines of text. Alex picked it up and started reading. The lines were short. Date, amount, purpose. He read in silence, and as he read, his expression changed not to anger, no, to something else, to an understanding that is unpleasant precisely because it is real. The list covered 2.5 years. $4,000 for medication no one had ever seen. $6,000 for bathroom pipes that they had replaced themselves without a plumber. $8,000 in one lump sum, urgent, I'll explain later. The amounts weren't huge individually. Together, they added up to a number that made Alex put down his spoon. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I keep track," Megan said simply. "I always do. It's my job to see where the money goes." "You think she?" "I don't think anything." Megan picked up her cup and took a sip. "I've shown you the facts. You decide." Alex stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it in half and put it in his inside pocket. He finished his soup, then called his mother at 10 p.m. It was a short call, without explanations. "Mom, it's not going to work right now. Sorry." Valerie was silent on the other end for about 3 seconds, then said in a voice meant to leave a mark, "I see. She put you up to this." Alex didn't argue. He already understood that any argument would be interpreted in exactly that way, and so silence was more honest. Valerie never forgave it. Not Alex, she forgave him everything. That was her peculiarity. She never forgave Megan. She recorded the debt in that internal ledger that smart, cruel people keep very meticulously and never show to anyone. The document came to Megan's attention by accident, like all truly important things. Her mother-in-law had come to stay for a few days. Some business in the city, she periodically stayed with them. Megan had long since adapted to this. She just lived her life in the same rhythm, changing nothing. Valerie left early in the morning, leaving a canvas tote bag of papers behind in the living room. Not her regular handbag, but a second one, which she apparently hadn't missed right away. Megan was about to put it in a closet. The bag was unzipped, and when she picked it up, a few sheets of paper slipped out onto the floor. She picked them up, intending to put them back, and paused for a second. A loan agreement. 3 pages, typed in dense print. The parties to the agreement were an individual and some LLC with a commercial-sounding name but a legal address in a rural county, in some small town. The amount was large. The interest rate was high, but not outrageously so. 18% annually, which wasn't unheard of in those years. The guarantor was another LLC with a different address. Megan worked with financial documents every day. She knew how to read the structure of a contract the way an experienced reader can guess a book's genre from the first paragraph. This contract was written competently, but there was one small detail that bothered her. The guarantor and the borrower had overlapping principles. This was evident from the corporate details if you read carefully. In essence, one entity was guaranteeing a loan to itself. It was a scheme, maybe legal, such things exist, maybe not. Megan didn't know whose documents these were. Her mother-in-law could be working with clients, helping friends, doing anything. She didn't meddle in her affairs. She straightened the pages, put them back in the bag, then took out her phone, photographed all 3 pages, and saved them to the MISC folder, where hundreds of other images lay: receipts, recipes, license plate numbers she needed to remember. The folder wasn't thematic. It was just a repository for things her analyst's brain refused to discard. She put the bag in the hall closet and went to work. 3 days later, Valerie called. "Megan, have you seen my canvas bag? I think I left some papers there. I saw it. It's in the closet by the door. It's safe," Megan replied. "Oh, good. I'll pick it up next time." Neither of them ever mentioned it again. The decision for Megan and Alex to completely separate their finances didn't happen overnight. It matured slowly, like any decision that looks radical from the outside, but feels obvious from within. By then, they already owned an apartment in the city, registered in Alex's name, officially with a mortgage, although they had paid it off early. They had a small investment portfolio through a brokerage account that Megan managed, and modest savings she kept in reliable, fixed-income instruments. Not wealth by the standards of their circle, but money by the standards of most people. Alex was just then becoming a partner in a construction company with a man named David Bell, a thorough and cautious individual. The company operated in the commercial real estate sector. It required significant capital, but provided stable returns. This meant their real financial situation was about to change substantially in the next year or two. It was at this moment that Megan said one evening, "Alex, I want to talk about money." "Seriously?" He put down his tablet and looked at her. She always talked about money seriously, but this was her particular brand of serious, the one that meant, "This isn't a conversation, it's a decision. I'm listening. Your mother is smart. Sooner or later, she will realize we have more than we show. And when she does, a process will begin that I don't want to experience. Not because I'm stingy with money, but because I know what it looks like. First requests, then demands, then resentments, then a huge fight involving the whole family and the narrative that I've brainwashed you." She paused for a moment. "I don't want that for you or for me. So what do you suggest? We buy a house under an LLC. Your share in the company is already properly structured. We move our savings to an offshore account. It's legal, you know. Officially, we live a normal life. The mortgage is paid off, our incomes are average. We don't lie, we don't hide. We just don't show." Alex was silent for a long time. "Is this because of her?" "It's because of us," Megan replied. "I want us to be happy. And for that to happen, we need to have the right distance between us and the world. Including a financial one." He didn't say yes or no. He got up, poured himself a glass of water, stood by the window, then said, "Give me a week to think about it." 3 days later, not a week, he often thought faster than he promised, he said, "You're right. Let's do it." 6 months later, they had a house in a gated community 40 minutes from the city, registered to an LLC whose owner was a friend of Alex's, a man with a spotless background and a full understanding of the situation. Valerie didn't know about this house. She was increasingly only knowing about them what they allowed her to know, and she took it for the full picture because she was confident that nothing significant could be hidden from her. That confidence was her blind spot. The Homestead Capital Fund came into being quietly, as most dangerous things do. Not with a bang and fanfare, but with a small piece of paper on a notary's desk and 2 signatures. Valerie had been moving toward this idea for a long time. Back in the 90s, working as a chief accountant at a factory, she had seen how people with the right papers and the right connections multiplied their money while others lost everything. She drew her conclusions. She acquired an apartment during that chaotic decade when a smart person could get ahead. She got the lake house. She emerged from that era with a reputation for being shrewd and an understanding that money doesn't just sit in a bank. It works, but only for those who know how to harness it. The idea for the fund came from an acquaintance, Gene Nelson, a mid-level former financier who had rebranded himself as an independent consultant. He approached her through a mutual friend and laid out the scheme, clean, neat, with numbers. Valerie listened in silence, asked the right questions, and by the end of the conversation, she knew she would do it. Only without Gene, whom she didn't trust precisely because he smiled too convincingly. She did it herself. She registered the fund through a lawyer she knew, who charged little for the paperwork and asked no questions. She rented a small office in a business center on the north side of the city. Nothing fancy. A desk, 2 chairs, a sign. She had a website made by a neighbor's grandson who was studying programming. He did it for a small fee and was pleased. The website looked serious. A logo, photos of the office, an About Us section with text about reliability and transparency, and contact information. She found her first investors among her own circle. Retirees from her neighborhood, with whom she shopped at the same market, former colleagues, acquaintances of acquaintances. She would visit them or call them, not pushing, not rushing. She explained it calmly, professionally. 40% annual return, payouts every quarter, a contract in hand, all official. Some were skeptical. She didn't try to convince them. She would simply come back a month later and mention that those who had already invested had received their first payment. This was true. For the first 6 months, she really did pay out from the money she had already collected, a classic Ponzi scheme. But none of the investors knew that term. And those who did couldn't imagine that this was how it was structured. The money went into the fund's account, and from there to the account of a sole proprietorship registered to a distant relative in another state. From the sole proprietorship, it was withdrawn as cash. A portion went back to the investors as interest. The rest settled where Valerie kept her own assets. An account in a small regional bank, cash in 2 separate locations, some moved through acquaintances. She kept meticulous records. A product of the old school, she used a binder with dividers, each transaction recorded by hand in its own column. She never confused the numbers. This was her pride and her order. The world outside could be falling apart, but in her binders, everything balanced to the penny. Over 3 years, there were more than 200 investors. The amounts varied. Some brought in a few $1,000s, others their entire life savings of 20 years. 70, 80,000, once $500,000 from an old man who sold his garage and part of his property. Valerie accepted it all, recorded it, smiled, and said, "Don't worry, we are very reliable." By the time it started to unravel, the total amount was approaching $8 million. She obtained Megan's personal information through Alex. It was an old incident, forgotten by him, but not by her. She had once asked her son to help with a family insurance plan. Something about a comprehensive medical policy that, she claimed, offered favorable terms for the whole family. Alex had asked if she needed everyone's information or just his. Everyone in the family, his mother had said. He passed on his wife's name, date of birth, and social security number. He forgot about it a second later. A minor detail, insurance, routine bureaucracy. Valerie received the information, never applied for any insurance, filed it away in a folder, and didn't think about it for 3 years. When she realized the investigation was closing in on her, it was through a source in the local administration, someone she had once helped with a permit issue, and who was now in her debt. She spent the night in silence, sitting at her kitchen table, drinking tea, thinking. She needed a specific person, a real person, with documents and a history. Someone onto whom she could shift the role of the independent financial consultant whose signature would be on several expert opinions about the fund's reliability. Those opinions already existed in the file, she had written them herself, but without an expert's signature, they were worthless. So, she needed a signature. Megan Zimmerman, financial analyst, impeccable reputation. Personal information in the folder. A signature sample. A few years ago, Valerie had asked her daughter-in-law to sign a birthday card for a mutual acquaintance. And she had signed it, without a second thought. Valerie had kept the card. She couldn't have explained why herself. A good accountant never throws away paper. She found a person who could forge signatures through a third party. Not directly, but through an intermediary to whom she said the bare minimum. She paid in cash and received 4 pages of expert opinions, bearing the signature, M. V. Zimmerman. Neat, with all the correct pressure points and characteristic slant. She inserted the documents into the fund's file, backdating them. It wasn't difficult, she managed all the documentation herself. Then she called the district attorney's office herself, anonymously. She reported that she knew about the fund's activities and the role of an independent consultant, and she gave the name. It wasn't an impulse or revenge in the heat of the moment. It was the cold, methodical decision of a person who had worked with numbers for 40 years and knew. There is no room for emotion in accounting. There is debit and credit. There are losses that must be written off to someone. Tamara Rogers filed a police report in early March. She was 72 years old and lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in a suburb. 3 years ago, she had invested $46,000 into the fund. It was everything she had saved in her life, her retirement savings, money from selling her mother's earrings, and what she had put away, little by little, from every pension check for almost 10 years. For the first year and a half, she received payments, small but regular, every quarter. They came as a transfer to her bank card with a short message. Income distribution. She told her neighbor about it. The neighbor asked for the company's number. Tamara gave it to her. Then the payments started to be delayed. Then the office phone number stopped working. Then the website disappeared. She went to the office address herself, at the business center on the north side of the city. The security guard told her the tenants had moved out 2 months ago. She wrote this down in her notebook, a habit of an older generation, to record everything important, and went to the police station. Detective Cromwell took her statement the same day. He had been in the Economic Crimes Division for 11 years and could tell from the first 20 minutes of a conversation with a complainant roughly what he was dealing with. This was something serious. The elderly woman spoke calmly, with a notebook in which she had dates, amounts, and the names of everyone she had told about the fund. Behind her, he could sense dozens more like her. "What's the name of the person who recruited you?" Cromwell asked. "Valerie Peterson. I don't know her last name. We met at the market. She said she was a woman with experience, a former chief accountant." Everything was supposed to be serious. Cromwell made a note, then another. "Will you wait a few minutes?" he asked. "I'd like to take all the documents you have. Everything she had you sign, all the receipts, any correspondence." "I have them with me," Tamara said, and pulled a plastic, zippered folder from her bag. Inside, everything was neatly organized in clear sleeves. "I thought they might be needed." Cromwell looked at the folder and at the elderly woman with her straight back and quiet voice. He thought that it was precisely witnesses like this, without hysterics, without drama, with a notebook and file folders, who made cases. He took the folder with both hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Rogers," he said. "We'll look into it." She nodded and adjusted the collar of her coat. There was no triumph or malice in her expression. Only the weariness of a person who for a long time didn't understand what was happening, and then finally did, and now wanted only one thing: for everything to be put right. The investigation ran for 6 weeks before it led to Megan. 6 weeks is not a long time for an economic case. Cromwell worked methodically, without haste. Layer by layer. First the fund, its documents, its accounts. Then the sole proprietorship in another state, the trail of the money, the chain of cash withdrawals. Then the documents with the signature M. V. Zimmerman. They landed on his desk beautifully, too beautifully, and that made him suspicious. In real fraud schemes, evidence is never this convenient. All together in one folder, with the right dates and the right names. Real evidence is found bookmarked in deleted files, in the memories of witnesses. It doesn't lie in plain sight. When it lies in plain sight, it means someone put it there. But logic was one thing, and the documents were another. The signature was there. The investigation was obligated to check. He signed the arrest warrant. A standard, non-discretionary procedure. But in his personal notebook, where he jotted down his own observations on the case, he wrote one word: careful. On the day of the arrest, he went himself, rather than sending a team. He wanted to see for himself, and he did. A woman in a beige robe who reads the warrant for her own arrest twice and doesn't ask a single unnecessary question the first time. Who asks permission to get a bag? Who returns 4 minutes later with a pre-packed bag, as if she knew this day would come, or was simply used to being prepared for any eventuality. And at the door, another woman, large, with gold earrings, in a housecoat over her dress. She stood by the living room door and said nothing. Cromwell's eyes swept over her. A second, no more. It was enough. The faces of people who are scared for someone else look one way. The faces of people who were expecting this exact thing look another. The difference is subtle, almost imperceptible. But he had been doing this for 11 years. In the car on the way, Megan looked out the window. The city was waking up. The first pedestrians. The first pigeons on the ledges. A vendor was setting out newspapers at a kiosk. An ordinary morning. She looked at it the way a person looks when they want to memorize something that will soon be gone for a time. "Miss Zimmerman," Cromwell said without turning around. "You have the right to a phone call to your lawyer as soon as we arrive." "I know," she said. "Thank you. Have you ever been in trouble with the law before?" "No, but I work with legal documents. I read the law when necessary." He nodded and said no more. But in his notebook, when they arrived and she got out of the car, he added 3 more words next to careful. She didn't do it. The cell was small. 4 steps long, 3 wide if you measured diagonally. 2 bunks, one occupied by a cellmate who was asleep, turned to the wall. A frosted lamp in the ceiling burned around the clock, only dimming slightly at night. The smell was institutional, neutral, like a clinic, but without the disinfectant. And that neutrality made it seem more real. Megan lay down on the bunk on top of the blanket, closed her eyes, and began to think. She knew how to think in uncomfortable conditions. It's a skill you develop if you work in open-plan offices for a long time, with constant noise, if you're used to analyzing data on a plane, on the subway, over lunch. The brain knows how to shut out the external and work internally. It's not meditation, it's just discipline. She constructed a timeline. The Homestead Capital Fund. She had looked it up in the database before her lawyer had even arrived. She had just asked the detective for the exact name. Registered 3.5 years ago. Her personal information. Alex had given it to his mother. She remembered that conversation, which had happened around the same time. The signature sampled the card her mother-in-law had asked her to sign a few years ago. A coincidence? No. She didn't believe in such coincidences, not in life, not at work. The documents from the canvas bag, the loan agreement with the cross-listed principals. She had photographed it 5 years ago. The photo was in the MISC folder. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. They had taken her phone during processing. Standard procedure. But the photos existed. They were in the cloud, which she had set to auto-sync 3 years ago and had never turned off. That meant they were there. They could be retrieved. Her lawyer could request access to her cloud storage. It was legal with a court order or voluntary disclosure. She mentally made a list of what could be done in the first 24 hours. Talk to her lawyer. Give him the cloud password. Explain about the document. Ask him to request a full list of documents with her signature from the investigation, every single one. Analyze the signatures herself. She knew exactly how she signed her name, and she knew there were subtleties that were difficult for even a good forger to replicate. The pressure on the last letter. A slight leftward tilt at the beginning. These were her quirks, developed over years. Her cellmate turned over and muttered something in her sleep. Megan closed her eyes again. There were a few hours until morning. Enough to get at least a little sleep. She decided to sleep. A decision made by a person with iron discipline is a command to the body, and the body usually obeys. Before she drifted off, she thought about Alex. Not with fear, but with the cautious curiosity one has for an unpredictable variable in an equation. He had stood in the hallway in his sweatpants and looked at her. What he had seen, she didn't know. She hoped he had seen what was there, a wife being taken away by mistake. But she wasn't sure. Certainty would come when he visited. Or didn't visit. That would also be an answer. Cromwell saw her on the second day, late in the afternoon. His office was small, with one window overlooking an inner courtyard. On the windowsill sat a small cactus, completely dry, but still alive. Cromwell watered it once a month, and was proud of it. On his desk were folders, a laptop, 2 phones, a cup with pens and pencils. Everything in its place, nothing extraneous. Megan walked in, sat down at the desk across from him without waiting for an invitation, placed her hands on her knees, and looked the detective straight in the eye. "I want to present you with a version of events," she said. "Not an excuse, a version with facts." Cromwell picked up a pencil. "I'm listening." She spoke for 20 minutes, without unnecessary words, without emotion, chronologically, like a person accustomed to presenting an analysis. Her personal information, its origin, the specific date of the conversation, which she had reconstructed from memory and could confirm through a text exchange with her husband. He had texted her about it briefly at the time. She had replied, "Okay." The document from the canvas bag, 3 pages, the date, its general content, the LLC's legal address, which she remembered because a corporate address in a small rural town was an anomaly, and she noticed anomalies automatically. The photos in the cloud. The signature. She explained about the pressure and the slant and asked for a piece of paper and a pen. She signed her name 5 times in a row, at different speeds, and placed the sheet in front of the detective. "Compare it with what's in the file," she said. "I'm not saying it will be immediately obvious, but it should be enough for a handwriting expert." Cromwell looked at her signatures, then opened a folder and took out a single sheet. Not the whole document, just the top part where the signature M. V. Zimmerman was. He placed it next to hers. Megan looked at both versions. The difference was small, but it was there. Her pressure on the final loop was slightly heavier. In the forgery, the final loop trailed off lightly, almost carelessly. The forger had likely been in a hurry or didn't have enough samples. "Do you see it?" she asked. "I see it," Cromwell said. He wasn't looking at the signatures. He was looking at her, at how she was examining the sheet, without anger, without a show of indignation, only with the focused attention of someone looking at a problem that needed to be solved. People pretending to be innocent behave differently. They either play on emotion or try too hard to restrain it. And in both cases, it's as noticeable as a false note. "The photo's in the cloud," he said. "Are you willing to voluntarily provide access?" "Yes. I can write a permission slip right now if you need it. I can give you the password." "Not now. Through your lawyer." "Officially." Cromwell closed the folder. "I have taken your version of events into consideration. You can go back now." She stood up. At the door, she stopped. "Detective Cromwell," she said. "I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to verify it. Those are two different things." "I know," he replied. When she had left, he sat for another 3 minutes, looking at the two signature versions lying side by side. Then he picked up the phone and called a handwriting expert he had worked with for years. He said, "I have an urgent task. How soon can you look at something?" The expert, Anton Simmons, a quiet man with large glasses and a habit of speaking slowly and very precisely, arrived the next day. Cromwell laid out both versions in front of him. Anton looked at them for a long time through a magnifying glass, then put it down and picked up another, smaller one with a light. He walked to the window and held the sheets up to the light. "The pressure," he said at last. "There's a difference in pressure on the terminal elements. This requires a full examination, but a preliminary look suggests different authors. How long for a full report?" "A week. If it's urgent, 5 days." "It's urgent," Cromwell said. Anton Simmons carefully placed both sheets into separate evidence bags and left without asking a single extra question. Cromwell opened his notebook. Next to the entry, "She didn't do it," he wrote the date and, "check the document chain." Who had physical access to the funds folders? This was a new direction. It led where he had already almost decided it would lead. But in his line of work, almost decided and proven were from different universes. Alex barely slept during those weeks. It was a physical sensation, not like fatigue, but like a constant, dull pressure in his chest that didn't go away, day or night. He worked. Went to the office, signed papers, talked to his partner, gave instructions to foreman, all of it like a well-oiled machine functioning independently of what was happening inside. His partner, David Bell, asked him directly once, "Are you okay?" Alex replied, "I'll handle it." David nodded and didn't ask again. He knew how to respect another person's silence. It was one of the reasons they had worked together for 7 years without serious conflict. But when Alex left the conference room, his partner watched him go with the expression of someone watching a man walk on thin ice. "He's holding up, for now, but best not to rush him." In the evenings, Alex returned to the apartment where his mother would already be sitting in the kitchen or the living room. She would cook something simple, oatmeal, or scrambled eggs. And that, strangely enough, was the worst part. His mother, playing hostess in his home. His mother, pretending everything was normal. She framed her presence as care, and he didn't have the strength to figure out where the care ended and the calculation began. Inside, this is what was happening. He was replaying 7 years. Not in order, but scattered, like picking up a deck of cards that had been dropped. Here was Megan, in their 3rd year of marriage, silently placing the list of his mother's expenses in front of him. No reproach, no pressure, just facts. Here she was, organizing his birthday party, the way he wanted it, not the way his mother wanted, and not explaining herself to anyone. Here she was last year, going with him to a negotiation he was afraid he would lose. Sitting beside him, silent, and after they left, telling him quietly and precisely where he had gone wrong in his argument and what needed to be fixed next time. Here she was 3 years ago, sick with the flu, lying in bed with a fever. And the only thing she had asked was for him not to call his mother, because she would come and fuss. He couldn't find a single moment in those 7 years when she had been dishonest with him. Not one. And still, that worm of doubt lived inside him, because the documents existed, because the signature was there, because detectives don't arrest people for no reason. They need grounds. His mother appeared in the kitchen every morning by 8. She had stayed with him since the first day, to support him, and she kept staying longer, finding new reasons not to leave. Every morning she would pour him coffee and say something not about the case. No, she was too smart for that, she didn't push directly. She talked about other things. About the neighbor's daughter who also thought she knew her husband. About a friend whose wife made him lose everything. About people who know how to seem proper as long as it's convenient for them. Alex drank his coffee and said nothing, but the words settled. It was a slow process, like rust. On the 10th day, he called Arthur King, the lawyer he trusted, who had been handling his company's affairs for 5 years. "Arthur, I need an honest answer to one question," he said without preamble. "Not a legal one, not about the case's prospects. A personal one." "Ask," Arthur King said. "If you had talked to her for 20 minutes, like the detective did, would you have believed her?" A short pause, 3 seconds. "Then, Alex, I talked to her for 40 minutes at the detention center 3 days ago." "Yes, I would have." "I do." "She could be deceiving you." "She could," the lawyer agreed. "But there are details that don't deceive. She knew about a document that is a key piece of evidence in the case. She knew about it 5 years before it appeared there. She has photos. You don't make that up in a cell overnight, Alex. It either exists or it doesn't. Let the investigation check." "They will. But you asked me, and I answered." Alex hung up and sat for a long time by his office window. It was raining outside, a stubborn April rain with no intention of stopping. He looked at the wet rooftops and thought about the one thing he didn't want to think about, which was precisely why he kept thinking it. His mother had asked for the personal information. He had given it. He visited her 2 weeks after the arrest. The visiting room was small. A table, 2 chairs, a partition, not bars like in the movies, just glass. They spoke through a receiver. He arrived early and waited for 5 minutes, looking at the empty chair across from him. Megan walked in. Gray institutional top, hair pulled back. She always pulled her hair back when she needed to focus. Her face was calm, not feigned, genuinely so. They looked at each other through the glass for a few seconds in silence. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm okay. Not sleeping well, but that will pass." A pause. "You've lost weight." "I'm not sleeping well either." She nodded, waiting. Alex put his hand on the table instinctively, as if to take her hand through the glass, and only realized at the last moment that it was impossible. "Megan, I have to tell you." He looked not at the glass, but at her, directly. "The first few days, I didn't believe it. Then for 3 days, there was this period, I can't explain it. There was a moment when I allowed for the possibility." He stopped. "That's the wrong word." I doubted. "That's wrong too. There was just a moment when everything in my head lined up in a way that made it seem possible. I hate myself for it, but it happened." Megan was silent, not interrupting. "Now, I don't believe it at all. Arthur talked to you." "I've known him for 12 years. He never tells a client what they want to hear. He told me the truth. And I myself. I remembered something." Alex hesitated slightly. "Mom asked for your personal information about 3 years ago. I gave it to her. I didn't think about it at the time." Megan looked at him. "I know," she said. "I thought about that too, the first night." "I'm sorry for the middle part," he said, "for those few days." She was quiet for a long time, not looking away. Then she nodded once, sharply. "Okay," she said. "Now listen. I have a theory about what happened, and I have specific steps. Arthur knows some of it. You need to know everything." And she began to speak in the same voice she had used with Cromwell. Without extra words, to the point, in order. Alex listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. He asked once about the document from the canvas bag, and Megan explained. By the end of the visit, he knew more about the case than the detective expected at this stage. It wasn't a plan. It was just 2 smart people who, in 35 minutes, had assembled what had been just fragments separately. On his way out, he stopped by a guard and asked how often he could visit. The guard told him. Alex said thank you and walked out into the April rain. At home, his mother was in the kitchen, drinking tea and watching television with the sound off. Just the picture. It was a habit of hers. She said that a TV with a picture, and no sound was calming. Alex suspected it was just a way to seem busy without actually being busy. "You're back," she said. "Tea?" "No." He walked past her into his study and closed the door. He didn't slam it, just closed it quietly. He sat at his desk, looking at the tabletop, then at the wall, then out the window. Outside, the April rain had finally stopped, and a first strip of blue sky in a week had broken through above the buildings across the street. No, not blue, more of a whitish gray, like faded fabric. Not real sky, just a temporary one. Alex looked at it without thinking, just looking, giving his mind a second of emptiness. Then he started to remember. But differently now. He wasn't replaying 7 years in search of a flaw in Megan. He was replaying the same 7 years in search of a flaw in his own perception of his mother. This was more unpleasant. His mother had always been there. That in itself wasn't a bad thing. Mothers are there. But for Valerie, there had always meant in the know. She knew about his business negotiations. He had told her himself. She knew about his partner, also from him. About the mortgage, of course. She had offered to help then. He had politely declined. Megan's personal information, yes. She had asked for it for insurance. He had given it without a second thought, because he was busy with other things at the time, and his mother seemed just like a mother with another administrative need. Now he wondered, why did she need an insurance policy with his wife's personal information? What kind of insurance requires someone else's social security number? He remembered another incident. A small one, that would never have surfaced if not for today. About 4 years ago. At some family dinner, just the three of them, him, Megan, his mother. Valerie had suddenly asked Megan to write her full name on an envelope. "You have such beautiful handwriting, you write so neatly. Write down the address, my eyes aren't what they used to be." Megan had written a few words in her usual script. Alex hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Now, he did. A card, an envelope with her handwriting, her personal information. 3 pieces of a puzzle that were nothing on their own, but together, they were something. He stood up, walked to the small desk in the corner, the one that had been in the apartment before the renovation, the one he hadn't thrown out because his mother sometimes stayed with them and used it. The drawer was pulled out a little more than usual. He pulled it all the way open. Inside were the usual things. Pens, paper clips, a small notepad, a couple of receipts. And under the notepad, a sheet of paper. Blank, clean, but with a letterhead. A logo at the top, the name of the organization. The Homestead Capital Fund. Address, corporate details. A blank form, the kind you could print any text on and put any signature. Alex held the sheet in his hands and stared at it. His heart was beating steadily. He had his mother's build, but in critical situations, his pulse didn't fail him. Just steady, just the facts. "Alex, are you looking for something?" He looked up. His mother was standing in the doorway of the study in her housecoat, holding a cup of tea, perfectly calm, watching him. Then her gaze fell on the sheet in his hand. Something in her face changed. Not much, not so that someone who didn't know her well would notice. But Alex had known her his whole life. He saw that micro shift, that split second when control faltered, then snapped back into place. She composed herself, smiled almost instantly. "What's that you have there?" she asked, with the intonation that meant, "I already know what it is. But let's see what you say." Alex didn't answer. He looked at his mother for a long time, calmly, in a way she wasn't used to him looking at her. "Go on, Mom," he said at last. "I need to make a call." She stood there for a second, just long enough to make it clear she was leaving on her own terms, not at his request. Then she turned and left. Alex held the blank form for another minute, then took out his phone and dialed Arthur King's number. He answered on the second ring. "I need to talk," Alex said. "It's urgent. I found something, and I need to know how to properly give it to the detective." "Where are you now?" "At home. Don't let that sheet out of your hands. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Arthur King arrived in 35 minutes, earlier than promised, and the first thing he did was ask Alex not to touch the blank form with his bare hands. He took a clear plastic sleeve from his briefcase, carefully picked up the sheet by a corner, put it inside, and then inspected the desk drawer without touching its contents. He did all this in silence, businesslike, like a man who isn't surprised by such phone calls. Then he sat down, placed his briefcase on his knees, and looked at Alex. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't rush." Alex told him. The personal information, when and why his mother had asked for it. The card with Megan's handwriting. When was it? Under what circumstances? The canvas bag with the documents that his wife had discovered several years ago. He had learned about this from Megan during the visit and relayed it verbatim. The blank form, just now, in the drawer. Arthur King listened without interrupting. He clarified the date once, when Alex had given his mother his wife's personal information. Alex gave him the approximate time. In the fall, a little over 3 years ago. The lawyer nodded and wrote something in his notebook. "What now?" Alex asked when he had finished. "Now, you go to the detective. In person, without me." "Why without you?" "Because," Arthur King said, leaning forward, "this is an unconventional strategy. It's high risk. Any lawyer would tell you never to talk to the police without them. But your goal isn't just to be a witness, it's to establish a different kind of credibility. If you walk in there as a son, not as a client flanked by his lawyer, Cromwell will see you differently. It builds trust. But you will say exactly what you told me, and nothing more. No theories, no emotions. Just the facts and the timeline. Is that clear? And what do I tell him? Exactly what you told me, the lawyer repeated, standing up. I'll take the blank form. We'll document the handover properly. I'll call Cromwell and arrange a time. You'll go tomorrow, alone. Facts and chronology. He's a smart detective, he'll know what to do with it. Do you know him? I know of him. He's an honest cop. That's a rarity. Appreciate it. Arthur King was already at the door when Alex asked. Do you think she understands what's happening? The lawyer turned, paused for a second. She's a smart woman. He said it without judgment, as a statement of fact. Smart people understand everything. Often before anyone else. Sometimes that's precisely why they end up where they do. He left. Alex closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at the coat rack. His mother's coat was hanging there, a dark, well-made coat. She always bought things to last. He looked at it and turned away. The meeting with Cromwell took place the next morning. Alex arrived without a lawyer, as agreed, wearing a coat and carrying a folder, a little before the appointed time. He sat in the hallway for 5 minutes, watching people pass by. The precinct headquarters was bustling with its own business life. Someone was carrying papers. Someone was talking quietly on the phone by a window. A young detective hurried past with a coffee cup, not looking at anyone. A normal office, if you didn't think about what exactly they did here. Cromwell came out himself, shook his hand, led him into his office, and offered him water. Alex declined, sat down, and placed the folder on his knees. I want to help the investigation, he said without preamble. I'm listening, Cromwell replied, picking up a pencil. The same habit Alex had already noticed in people who think while someone else is talking. Alex spoke for about 20 minutes, chronologically, without extra words. Cromwell didn't interrupt, just jotted down key dates. When Alex finished, the detective was silent for about 10 seconds, just long enough so it wouldn't seem like he had already made up his mind. The blank form, where is it now? My lawyer will give it to you today. Officially, with a chain of custody receipt. Good. Cromwell put down the pencil. Mr. Peterson, I'll be straight with you. The investigation is moving forward. Your information is important. It completes the picture. But we need more time, about 3 weeks. And we need your help. What kind of help? For now, don't interfere. Cromwell looked at him directly. Live as you are, don't change your behavior. If your mother says or does anything, remember it, don't react, and call me. You want me to watch my own mother? I want you to protect your wife. Cromwell said it without pressure. The rest, the investigation will handle. Alex was silent. When will Megan be released? Soon, as soon as we complete the necessary procedural steps. The detective stood up, a sign that the conversation was over. Thank you for coming. This was the right thing to do. They shook hands. Alex went out into the hallway and stopped by the window. He looked down at the street below. A typical city street. Pedestrians, cars, a garbage truck turning at the corner. He stood there and thought, this is it, that feeling when you know you've done something irreversible. Not in a bad way, just irreversible. Megan was released on her own recognizance 4 days later. The official reason was the incompleteness of the evidence, requiring further investigation. For Valerie, this was a blow, quiet but precise. She found out the same day, in the evening, from Alex. He told her briefly, in passing, as he was serving himself soup. Megan was released. She'll be home tomorrow. Valerie put down her spoon. Released? She asked. On what grounds? The investigation is looking into it. It happens. It doesn't happen, she snapped. If someone is arrested, there are grounds. For them to be released, someone must have pulled strings. This isn't normal. Mom, Alex said, eat your soup. It was a new tone, not rude, but calm, even a little indifferent. She didn't recognize it. He had never spoken to her like that. Not as a child, not later. Usually, he either agreed or gently backed down. This was the eat your soup of a person who had stopped listening. The next morning, she called the district attorney's office. The person on duty took her message and said it would be passed on. She asked to be connected to someone specific. They explained that it doesn't work that way. She hung up and wrote a complaint, a detailed, 3-page letter, specifying dates, names, and egregious acts of negligence. She sent it by mail. The next day, she wrote another one, a little shorter, to a different agency. Cromwell read her complaints on his computer screen with the expression of a man who had received an unexpected but pleasant gift. In each complaint, Valerie, in her effort to prove her daughter-in-law's guilt, inadvertently revealed details that only someone inside the scheme could have known. She described the fund's structure more accurately than was apparent from the case materials. She mentioned amounts that had not yet been officially established by the investigation. She knew too much for a simple mother to whom a detective had explained everything. He printed both complaints and filed them in the case. Then he wrote in his notebook. Subject demonstrating active engagement. Continue observation. Megan returned home on a Friday around noon. Alex met her in the entryway. They hugged briefly, tightly, without words. Then she went into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, drank it standing by the sink, and looked around. Is she here? She asked quietly. In her room, reading. Megan nodded and put down the glass. She turned. Valerie was standing at the kitchen doorway. She was wearing a housecoat and the expression of someone who had already decided how this meeting would go. Megan, she said with an intonation that mixed sympathy and superiority in equal measure. How are you? Fine, Megan replied evenly. Thank you. They looked at each other for 3 seconds. Then Valerie said, I'm going to lie down, I have a bit of a headache. Of course, Megan said. The mother-in-law left. Alex and Megan exchanged a look. It was a long look, without a single word, but they both read everything they needed to. Life under the same roof for the next 3 weeks became an exercise in restraint that required constant control from both of them. Breakfasts, dinners, chance encounters in the hallway. Every domestic scene was charged with a tension that was invisible but palpable, like the pressure before a storm. Valerie conducted herself with a pointedly polite distance. She spoke little to her daughter-in-law, without barbs, almost neutrally. This was worse than open attacks. Open attacks are understandable, they are on the surface. The neutrality of a person who knows what they are doing is a completely different matter. Megan, in response, was equally neutral. She cooked, cleaned, went to the store. The same wife, the same routine. Only her gaze was slightly different. Not staring, not challenging. Just the look of a person with a constant background process running in their head. Observation, recording, without displaying the output. Alex lived between them like a thin partition, not in the sense of weakness, but in the sense of precision. He knew that one wrong word in either direction could shift what was currently held in a necessary balance. Cromwell had said, "Don't change your behavior." It was the most difficult order he had ever received. One morning at breakfast, on a Wednesday, when a light rain was falling outside and all three were silently drinking tea, Valerie said without looking up from her cup, "I heard a friend's niece got into a similar situation. She also said she didn't know." A pause. They gave her 8 years. Megan put down her cup. Alex didn't look up from his phone. A few seconds of silence. "Is that so?" Megan said calmly. "What was the story?" "Financial," Valerie replied curtly. "Like everyone's these days." She stood up, put her cup in the sink, and left. Megan and Alex didn't look at each other. They had learned not to look at each other in her presence because she knew how to read glances. They just both changed their breathing slightly, and that was enough. That evening, Alex texted Cromwell briefly. This morning, there was a comment about 8 years. Clear pressure. The detective replied an hour later, noted. Continue. At night, Megan worked on her laptop. The investigation had officially granted her access to some of the fund's documents as an interested party in the pre-trial investigation, which was unusual but not prohibited under certain conditions, which Arthur King had skillfully arranged. Cromwell had agreed. He had reason to believe that a person with her qualifications might find what a regular detective wouldn't see in the financial structure. He wasn't mistaken. Megan worked methodically, the way she worked with financial statements that needed to be audited for hidden schemes. She broke down the flow of money by time periods, built a diagram of the connections between accounts, and traced every transaction above a certain threshold. The fund, the main account, the sole proprietorship in another state, the cash withdrawals. The investigation already knew this. But there was another stream, a thin one, almost unnoticeable against the main flow. She found it on the third night, in the details of a single payment order, where the recipient line had an unfamiliar employer identification number. She looked it up in public databases. It was an individual registered in a small town 300 miles from the city. An account had been opened in this person's name at a regional bank with a nondescript name. A third of the fund's money, almost $2.7 million, had passed through this account. In small amounts, irregularly, as if deliberately broken up to avoid triggering automatic monitoring systems. Megan wrote down the account details on a separate sheet, closed her laptop, and looked at the clock. 3 a.m. Silence from the next room. Her mother-in-law was asleep. At 7:30 in the morning, she called Cromwell. He answered after the second ring. She suspected he was already at work. Detective Cromwell, I found an account. Regional bank, an individual. About a third of the funds went there. She recited the details in a steady voice, as if giving an address. A pause. Then, where did you get this information? A payment order in the document batch you provided. I can send a screenshot with the page number. Send it. Another pause. Miss Zimmerman, did you sleep at all last night? A little. Get some rest, he said, without a trace of humor. It's important for your health. She almost smiled. Almost. Alex found the forger a week after his conversation with Cromwell. Not through the investigation, but on his own. He had his own channels. The construction business brings you into contact with all sorts of people. And over the years, he had built a network of contacts that could, if necessary, reach into many dark corners. The man's name was Victor. Alex didn't know his last name, just his first name, and that he works with documents. He found him through a former foreman who had once mentioned that if you needed something nicely arranged, there was a guy. Alex had filed that away in his memory at the time with no intention of using it. Now he pulled it out. They met at a coffee shop in the northwest part of the city. An ordinary place, good coffee, noisy during the lunch hour. Victor turned out to be a nondescript man in his 50s, with neat hands and a habit of looking slightly past the person he was talking to. He arrived in a gray jacket, ordered tea with lemon, and zipped his jacket all the way up, even though it was warm in the cafe. Alex didn't introduce himself or explain how he got the contact. He just said, I want to talk about some specific signatures that were made about a year ago for someone I know. Victor took his tea, sipped it, put it down, and looked at Alex directly. I don't know what you're talking about. You do, Alex said calmly. I'm not asking you to admit it. I'm asking you to listen. Victor listened. Alex spoke briefly. There's a criminal case, there are forged signatures, and there's a detective who already has a report from a handwriting expert. The investigation will identify the forger. It's a matter of time, not if. The only question is whether the forger goes to the detective himself, as a witness with information about the client, or if the detective comes to him, and then it's a different charge and a different outlook. Victor listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change. A good poker face, practiced over years. I need to think about it, he said when Alex had finished. Of course. Alex took out his phone and placed it on the table between them. Just one detail. He tapped the screen, and the voice recording app minimized. The recording had been running since the beginning of the conversation. This is in case you decide the conversation never happened. It did. Victor looked at the phone, then at Alex, then back at the phone. You're not a detective, he said. No. I'm the husband of the person my mother framed. Alex put the phone back in his pocket. I spoke with the detective yesterday. Your name hasn't come up yet. I want it to be in your power to go there yourself and say it first. Victor stared into his teacup for a long time, then said quietly, almost to himself, they told me it was a safe job. That the woman would sign everything herself, she was just afraid to do it officially. I didn't know about a criminal case. You know now. I need the detective's number. Alex took a small piece of paper from his pocket. He had prepared it in advance and placed it on the table. Cromwell's number, handwritten. Sooner is better, he said. Time is a factor. Victor took the paper, folded it in half, and put it in his jacket pocket. He stood up without finishing his tea, gave a short nod without a word, and left. Alex watched him disappear into the lunchtime crowd. Then he turned back to his own coffee cup. The coffee was long cold. He drank it anyway, methodically, to the last drop. Victor called Cromwell that day at 5:30 p.m. The detective saw him the next morning. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Afterward, Cromwell closed his office door, took out his notebook, and sat motionless for several minutes, staring at a single point. The picture was complete. Not in the sense of a guess, but in the sense of proof. The forger had testified about the client. The regional account that Megan had found was investigated. The individual turned out to be a distant relative of Valerie's, who had long lost contact with her and had no idea her personal information was being used. Another victim, this time unintentional. The handwriting analysis report concluded that the signatures were not made by Zimmerman, with a 97% probability. Cromwell wrote up a request to remove Meghan's suspect status and, simultaneously, to open a criminal case against Valerie Peterson under the state statute for large-scale fraud. He signed the documents, handed them to his secretary, and looked at the cactus on his windowsill. It needed watering. It had been almost a month. He poured some water from his kettle, set the glass next to it, then picked up his phone and dialed Alex. "We need another 10 days, he said. "Understood," Alex replied. Briefly, without extra questions. Cromwell hung up, looked out the window. The inner courtyard, a poplar tree, a bench where employees sat to smoke during their lunch break. Everything as usual, only this case was not quite usual. A son who came in on his own and named his mother. A wife who, in a detention cell, found in one night what the investigation had been looking for a week. A family that one woman had tried to destroy for her own cover, and which, in response, had proven to be more precise and more patient than she was. He opened his notebook and wrote the last entry on that page. Final phase. Memorial Day. The phone in Valerie's hand was hot. She had been holding it for a long time, dialing and redialing, and the device was warming up, as any object would when squeezed too tightly. She called people in the order one usually calls when help is needed. First, those who are obligated, then those who owe you, then those who are simply there. The first was her contact in the local administration, Gene Foster, a mid-level official whom she had once helped with a permit for his garage. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail again. She sent a text. "Call me back urgently." There was no reply in an hour or 2. That in itself was an answer. Then she called her lawyer, Richard Sterling, not young, expensive, with a good reputation in tax dispute cases. He answered immediately. Listened to her question, what to do if the investigation has gone in the wrong direction, and answered briefly and clearly. Say nothing. Don't call, don't write, don't go to the DA's office. Stay quiet and wait until it's clear what exactly they have. And if they come for me? She asked. Then I need to be there. Nothing else. That's it? That's it, Valerie. She hung up, sat by the window, looking out at the street. Cars, pedestrians, a little girl on a scooter with a helmet. Her mother was pulling her by the hand. Normal life outside, to which she still had access. For now. Then she called Ingrid. Come up to the lake house for Memorial Day weekend, she said. Invite Tony and Rachel if they can make it. I want to have a proper break. I'm tired of this city. Of course, Ingrid said with the readiness that distinguishes a true friend. We haven't gotten together in ages. So we'll get together. I'll make barbecue. Everything will be fine. She pressed end call and held the phone in her hand for another second. Ingrid knew nothing, not about the fund, not about the accounts, nothing. She was just a friend who possessed the right qualities. She admired, she listened, she showed up. Right now, that was exactly what was needed. To be surrounded by people, to have a party, to make the 3-day weekend look like the normal life of a normal woman who had nothing to fear. Normal life. For another 3 days. She was good at that. Living normally when something bad was lurking behind her. She had been good at it since the 90s, when the factory was in turmoil, when there were rumors of audits, when 2 of her colleagues had already been subpoenaed. Back then, she had continued to come to work on time, greet the security guard, drink tea during her lunch break. Normal life, like a shield. It had always worked. Or almost always. Friday, the first day of the long weekend. Morning. Valerie was packing a large tote bag with provisions, with the same meticulous care with which people in the old Soviet days used to assemble care packages. Everything packed tightly, everything with a purpose, nothing extra. The brisket was in a container with the rub she had prepared the night before. A separate bag for salt, spices. Skewers in a cloth case. The tablecloth, that same linen one with the embroidery, wrapped in plastic. 2 kinds of cheese. Radishes from her neighbor's garden. Early strawberries, from a greenhouse, but still. The bottles were wrapped in newspaper, as her mother had taught her 40 years ago. At that same moment, in Cromwell's office, his secretary brought him a folder to sign. Inside was a search warrant for the lake house in the Pine Ridge community and an arrest warrant for Valerie Peterson. Cromwell signed both documents evenly, without haste, the way you sign papers at the end of a long job, when you know you've done everything right. He closed the folder and handed it back. Valerie zipped up the bag and called the train station to check the schedule. It was an hour and 20 minutes to Pine Ridge on the commuter train from Grand Central. The first morning train was at 8:47. She decided to go today, Friday, to have time to air out the house, prepare the meat again, and clear the yard of last year's leaves under the apple trees before breakfast tomorrow. At the same time, in the hallway of their New York apartment, Alex was placing a thermos of coffee by the door. Next to it was a small folder. He got dressed, walked over to Megan, who was standing by the mirror in the entryway. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes." She was wearing a light-colored coat, a beige, tailored one, the same one she had bought before this whole story began and which she wore to important meetings. Her hair was pulled back, lightly pinned, neat, without fuss. Her face was calm. Alex looked at her for a second longer than usual. "You look amazing," he said. Megan raised an eyebrow slightly, just a fraction. "That's important right now, for some reason?" "Yes." She picked up her bag. He picked up the thermos and the folder. They left together. At that hour, Cromwell was leaving the city in an unmarked car with 2 plainclothes officers and a driver. They drove without sirens, in the heavy Memorial Day traffic of city dwellers heading for the country. The detective looked out the window and drank coffee from a plastic cup. Outside, roadside stands selling seedlings, canopies with new potatoes, and stalls with strawberries flashed by. The May landscape of the tri-state area, familiar, unchanging, completely indifferent to where this particular car was going. Ingrid arrived on Saturday at noon in Tony's car, because Tony lived on the way and drove herself. Rachel had called the day before to say she couldn't make it. Her grandson had a fever, and she was staying in the city. So there were 3 of them: Valerie, Ingrid, and Tony. Valerie set the table under the apple tree, the same one that had bloomed every spring for 20 years. The apples from it were sour and small, but it gave the right shade. The linen tablecloth lay smooth. The plates, white, for the lake house, with slightly different patterns, but that was fine. That's how it always is with people who live authentically, not for show. The crystal glasses, brought from the city last year. They chimed with every touch. Ingrid walked around the yard with the air of someone seeing it for the first time, though she had been here many times. "Val, this is just beautiful," she said by the greenhouse. "Have you planted the cucumbers yet?" "I'll transplant the seedlings in about 10 days. "And the tomatoes?" "Those too, and peppers. I'm trying a new kind of pepper this year. A neighbor gave me the seeds, says they're very sweet." They talked about seedlings, about the fence, about the dogwood tree beyond the gate, which was particularly lush this year. Tony helped set the plates. The coals in the smoker were already glowing, gray on the outside, scarlet within, perfect. The May air was thick with the scent of new leaves and, somewhere far off, the smoke from neighboring yards, where others were also grilling, also celebrating. When they sat down at the table, and Ingrid filled the glasses, Valerie realized she was in a good mood, a real, unforced one. It was unexpected. She hadn't thought she would be able to relax, that the anxiety would let go, even for an hour. But it had. The sun, the table, her friends, the meat in the smoker. It was all so familiar, so hers, that the fear simply took a step back. It hadn't disappeared, it was standing behind her, but as long as she looked forward, she couldn't see it. To the hostess, Ingrid proposed. To Val and her lake house. To us, Valerie corrected. To all of us. The glasses touched. The chime was clear, long. After the first bottle, the conversation turned to where it always, sooner or later, turned in her company. To stories. Valerie's stories were good. She knew how to tell them, held her pauses, chose her details, knew when to fall silent so the listener would fill the silence with their own imagination. Ingrid asked about her daughter-in-law. Carefully. The way you ask about something you already know in broad strokes, but want the details. "So, how is she? Still under investigation?" "She's out on bail for now," Valerie said, pouring more wine. "But not for long. The evidence against her is serious. Signatures, bank accounts, witnesses. And how is Alex holding up?" That word, she pronounced with an intonation that meant, "My son is a hero. He's upset. But I'm here for him. He's strong, he'll get through it." "And what does she herself say?" Tony asked. "Is she denying it?" "Of course," Valerie replied. "People like her always deny it. She found a good lawyer, and he's trying to do something with the documents." She waved her hand. "But documents are documents. The signatures are there, the account numbers are there, it's all cleanly documented. You can't argue with that." "It's scary," Ingrid said quietly. "So many years next to a person, and then this." "Exactly," Valerie picked up. She knew how to seem so proper. "I saw it, I always saw that something was off. Too quiet, too polite. Those are the most dangerous ones." Ingrid nodded and picked up her phone. It was an almost unconscious gesture, a habit of a person who often chronicled their life. She tapped the voice memo icon and placed the phone on the tablecloth next to her plate. She often did this during get-togethers, liking to listen back later and remember the evening. Right now, she barely thought about it. "Aren't you afraid she'll find some way to get out of it?" Tony asked. "Lawyers can do all sorts of things these days." "No," Valerie answered confidently. "There's too much there. A lawyer is one thing, facts are another. The facts are in the case file. You can't remove them." Ingrid held her glass with both hands and looked at her friend. She was listening intently, as she always did when something didn't quite add up. Something in this conversation was off. The same intonation as that first time. The too knowing tone, the too precise details about accounts and witnesses. How would a mother-in-law know the details of an investigation with such accuracy? Ingrid took a sip and said nothing. It wasn't her story. Not yet. The conversation drifted on. About the garden, about grandchildren, about how the summer was going to be hot, the forecasters were already warning. Valerie served more meat, tended to the coals, refilled the wine glasses. She was a hostess in the best sense, the kind of person is when they are in their element, in their domain. "It's so nice here," Tony said, looking up at the apple trees, at the few white petals still clinging to the outermost branches. "I wish it could always be like this." "It will always be like this now," Valerie said. She said it with conviction, the way you say things that have already been decided. "It's so nice at our lake house now. We finally got that vulture out of our lives. And it's like we can breathe again. Isn't it?" Ingrid laughed. Tony did too, a little through her nose. Valerie raised her glass. Beyond the gates of the lake community, something was moving. The security guard at the entrance had received a call 20 minutes earlier from the district attorney's office. Polite, with instructions to let a car with specific license plates through. He wrote down the numbers, read them back, and tucked the paper under the glass of his booth. When the Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the gate, he raised it without any extra questions. Silently. The way you raise it when everything is already understood. The car entered the community and moved down the main lane. Slow speed, 15 miles per hour, no more. Dogwood trees bloomed on both sides. The pine trees cast their first, still transparent, shadows. A few kids were kicking a ball in the road and moved aside, unhurriedly. A neighbor with a shovel over her shoulder watched from behind her fence. Megan sat in the passenger seat and looked straight ahead. Alex was driving. He knew this community. He had been here dozens of times since childhood, then as an adult, then with Megan several times a year. He knew where the asphalt cracked at the third turn. He knew that Claudia's dog, 2 properties down, always barked. Everything was familiar, and yet he was driving here for the first time. "Like this? Turn here?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Yes," Megan said. The car stopped at the property. From outside, you could hear voices. Women's laughter, the clinking of dishes, the smell of smoked meat. The party was in full swing, unaware of itself. Alex turned off the engine, looked at the gate, then at his wife. "Are you sure?" "I have nothing to do with what's about to happen," Megan said. "The detective is doing his job. We're just here." "Just here," he repeated. Behind them. The door of an unmarked car that had stopped behind them slammed shut. Valerie noticed the car out of the corner of her eye. A Navigator. Dark, New York plates. It had entered the community slowly, and something about that slowness had caught her attention before her mind could even formulate a question. She kept talking about something, the neighbors, firewood for the winter, while simultaneously tracking the car with her peripheral vision. The car made the correct turn, began to slow down, and stopped. Valerie fell silent mid-sentence. For a few seconds, Ingrid and Tony didn't understand why, and then they too looked in that direction. The car door opened. The passenger side, on the right. A 2-second pause. Then a woman in a light-colored coat stepped onto the path in front of the gate. Dark hair pulled back, a straight back. She stood by the closed gate and looked in at the table, at the apple tree, at the people. She looked calmly, without rushing. The way a person looks when they have arrived where they were going and are in no hurry. "Is that?" Ingrid began. Tony put down her fork. Alex got out from the driver's side. He closed the door and stood next to his wife, slightly behind and to the side. "The way you stand next to someone when you want to make it clear, we are together. This is our shared decision." He didn't look at his mother. He looked straight ahead, at the path. Following them, from the second car that had parked behind the Navigator, 3 men got out. 2 in plain clothes, and Cromwell. The detective was without a folder, without any demonstrative gestures. He just got out, straightened his jacket, and looked around calmly, the way people who know how to enter any space so that it's not immediately clear how important the moment is. Megan unlatched the gate. The heels of her shoes struck the old flagstone path sharply, evenly, without haste. The sound was very specific. Each step separate, each step in its place. You don't walk like that when you're nervous. You walk like that when you know where you're going. Valerie didn't stand up. She sat and watched her daughter-in-law, who was walking toward her table, on her path, and her face was impassive. That particular impassive face of a person holding on to control with their last ounce of strength and understanding that it won't last long. Megan stopped 3 steps from the table, looked at the tablecloth, the glasses, the half-eaten meat, at her mother-in-law's face. "Good evening, Valerie," she said. In her voice, there was no anger, no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a greeting. Just words. And that was precisely what was unbearable. Alex followed her and stood beside her. He looked at his mother, the way a person looks when they have finally seen what they should have seen long ago, and now they are just looking, without hatred, without pity, with that calm, heavy understanding that is worse than both. He noticed how she had changed in those few seconds. Not externally. Externally, she was the same. A large, straight-backed woman, gold earrings in her ears. But something inside had shifted, and it was visible. In the way she held her hands on the table, in the way she didn't look at him, though she always looked first. He realized that his mother, the person he had known his whole life, was now truly afraid. For the first time in his memory. And this knowledge brought him no relief, no satisfaction, only that quiet, final sadness that comes when something important ends forever. Cromwell entered last, stopped at the edge of the table, surveyed the set tablecloth, the glasses, the remnants of a good party. He paused, just long enough for everyone to realize that this was a different moment now, not the one that was 5 minutes ago. "You've made yourselves comfortable, Valerie," he said quietly, almost politely. "A shame it won't last." Tony, by the fence, pressed a hand to her chest. Ingrid didn't move, sitting with her phone on the tablecloth, looking alternately at her friend, the detective, the daughter-in-law. She had known Valerie for 40 years. She had seen her in all sorts of situations. In grief, in joy, in anger, in illness. She had never seen her like this. Not scared, no. Caught. That was a different word, and it fit more precisely than any other. Valerie slowly set down her glass, looked at Megan for a long time, with the expression of a person sorting through options and finding none that fit. Then she shifted her gaze to her son. "Alex," she said. Her voice was almost even, only the lowest register betrayed something else. "Explain to them. This is some kind of misunderstanding. Tell them who she is, what she did. Tell them." Alex looked at his mother, silent. He didn't turn away, didn't lower his eyes. He looked straight at her, calmly. For so long, that the silence became physically palpable, like the air pressure before a storm. Ingrid would later say that the silence lasted a few seconds. It felt like several minutes. During that time, Cromwell took 1 step forward and stopped. He didn't rush. He knew how to wait. A well-placed silence sometimes did more than any legal word. Let her figure it out herself. Let it be her understanding, not his explanation. Valerie understood everything from that silence. Not from words, there were no words. It was precisely the absence of words. She had raised this man alone. For 37 years, she had been the only person he listened to, the person he was afraid to disappoint, the person to whom, in the end, he always yielded. She knew his silence hesitant, guilty, searching for a way out. This was a different silence. She hadn't known it before. She knew it now. For the first few seconds after Cromwell nodded to his officer, Valerie didn't move. It wasn't confusion or shock. It was the brief time a smart person takes to assess a situation before choosing a course of action. She had lived 61 years and had always chosen a course. Always. The officer approached the table and said the standard phrase, quietly, without drama. Valerie stood up, smoothed down her dress, and looked at him with the expression of someone who has been mistaken for someone else. "This is a mistake," she said clearly. "I demand an explanation." "On what grounds?" "Valerie," Cromwell said, "the grounds are outlined in the warrant. You will have a chance to review it right now. I know how this works." She spoke with force, loudly, so that Ingrid and Tony could hear every word. "I've worked with documents for 40 years. I can tell immediately when something isn't right. Do you understand what you're doing?" "I do," Cromwell said. Then tell me directly, what exactly are you charging me with? On what grounds? What evidence do you have? The case file is 240 pages long. He said it calmly, almost politely, the way you state a number that speaks for itself. If you wish to review it, you will be given every opportunity in accordance with procedure. She stared at him, he stared back. It lasted a few seconds. Two smart people, each understanding the situation completely. The only difference was that one of them was in control of it, and the other was not. And they both knew it. She turned to Ingrid sharply, with the calculated move of a lawyer turning to the jury at a crucial moment. Ingrid, you know everything. Tell them. Tell them I'm a normal person, that I would never. Ingrid, say something. Ingrid looked at her friend. She sat motionless, her hands on her knees, and her face had the expression of someone for whom the truth has arrived not when it was expected, but when they are completely unprepared for it. She was thinking about the conversation at this very table an hour and a half ago, about what she had recorded on her phone, about how precisely and eagerly her friend had described a scheme that she supposedly only knew about from a detective. Val, she began, I don't know what to say, Ingrid said quietly. I truly don't. It was honest. It was precisely what Valerie had not expected. Not betrayal, not a refusal to help, but this simple confusion from a friend who had known her for 40 years and now didn't know what to say. It meant she, too, had sensed something. Had sensed it long ago. Valerie fell silent. Cromwell walked over to Ingrid and held out his business card, carefully, with 2 fingers, the way you offer something important without wanting to startle. If you need to clarify anything, or if you want to talk, he said, call me anytime. Ingrid took the card, looked at it. Then at the phone lying on the tablecloth. The recording was still running. She pressed stop. I'll save this, she said quietly, not addressing anyone in particular. Just in case. Cromwell gave a barely perceptible nod. They led Valerie down the path to the gate, between 2 officers, without handcuffs, because she was walking on her own and holding herself straight. It was her last tribute to her own pride. To walk on her own, not to let them take her by the arm, not to show her legs that they might buckle. She didn't look back. Megan and Alex stood by the apple tree, the very one under which an hour ago there had been a party. Its shadow now lay differently. The sun had moved, and the shadow stretched across the path to the fence, long and narrow. Alex watched his mother go. Megan watched him. Then he lowered his gaze, found her hand, and took it. Not impulsively, not for show. He just took it, the way you take what is yours. Megan didn't pull her hand away. They stood like that under the apple tree on the old flagstone path and were silent. From beyond the gate came the slam of a car door, then another, then an engine starting. Tony was still standing by the fence. She didn't know whether to leave or stay, so she just stood. The way a person stands when they feel awkward, but leaving would be even more awkward. Ingrid was sitting at the table, staring into an empty glass. A dark stain from the wine was spreading on the tablecloth. Girls, Alex said at last, without turning around. You should go. It's all right. Tony nodded with relief. Ingrid stood up, gathered her bag slowly, like a person who needs time to collect themselves on the inside, not just the outside. At the gate, she stopped. Megan, she said. Megan turned. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I really didn't know. I understand, Megan said. Without a smile, but also without coldness. Just. I understand. Ingrid left, Tony behind her. The car started, rustled down the lane, and it became quiet. The kind of quiet that follows noise and at first seems deafening. Megan looked at the table, at the linen tablecloth with its embroidery, spoiled by the stain, at the half-empty glasses, at the platters of cold meat. Then at her husband. Let's go, she said. Let's clear all this away. They cleared it together, without talking. They took a long time, meticulously, the way you clear away something that is no longer needed but must be treated with respect. They put the dishes in a box, folded the tablecloth with the stain inside, doused the smoker, and carried the table to the porch. When they were finished, Alex sat on the old wooden bench by the apple tree. Megan sat next to him. The yard smelled of charcoal and cooled meat. And the dogwood beyond the fence added its scent on top, heavy, sweet, spring-like. What now? He asked. Not to her. Just out loud, into the May air. Now, it's over, she replied. Tamara Rogers sat in her kitchen, tending to her seedlings. Every year, she grew tomatoes on her windowsill starting in February, repotted them in March, and by May, she always had several dozen sturdy, dark green cups waiting for the garden. This year, the garden was in question. She didn't have money for the bus to her community garden plot, and there was no one to ask. Several months had passed since she filed her report. The detective had called twice to clarify details, asking her to confirm amounts. She confirmed everything, found everything in her little file folders. There, in the plastic zippered folder, every transaction, every contract, every receipt, every text message about income distribution was saved. She was used to keeping her documents in order. First, because her mother had taught her to, and later, because without it, life falls apart. The phone rang around 3 o'clock. An unfamiliar New York area code. She usually didn't answer such calls, but something made her pick up. "Mrs. Rogers?" A man's voice asked. "This is Detective Cromwell, from the Economic Crimes Division. We spoke in March." "I remember," she said. "I'm calling to inform you that an arrest has been made. The investigation has identified the full circle of individuals involved in the fraud. As part of asset seizure measures, their accounts and property have been frozen. A portion of the funds will be returned to the victims through the sentencing and restitution process. Not all of it, but a significant portion. Your lawyer will receive the appropriate notification." Tamara Rogers listened. Her right hand lay on the table next to a small cup with a seedling. "How much will be returned?" she asked. "The exact amount will be determined by the court. According to our preliminary calculations, between 30 and 40% of your investment. Possibly more. Depending on what can be recovered from the seized assets." "So, not everything," she said. Not with resentment, just clarifying a fact. "Not everything," Cromwell confirmed. "I wanted you to know that in advance. To be honest." "Okay," she said. "Thank you for being honest." She was quiet. 30 to 40% of $46,000 was $14,000 to $18,000. It wasn't much. It was very little compared to everything she had saved for 10 years. But it was something. Something, not nothing, as she had almost gotten used to thinking. "That woman," she said at last. "Valerie Peterson. She was arrested today." Tamara Rogers was silent again. For a long time, so long that Cromwell was about to ask if she could still hear him, but he didn't. He knew how to wait. "Thank you," she said at last. Simply, without any particular intonation, no great relief, no triumph. "Just thank you, the way you say it when something right has finally happened. And the only words for it are the simplest ones." "Stay strong, Mrs. Rogers," Cromwell said. "I am," she replied. "I'm used to it." She hung up and looked at her seedlings. Then she stood up, poured a thin stream of water into the cups, carefully, so as not to wash away the soil. Then she opened the window to let in the May air. The sun on the windowsill was warm, and the young stems reached for it, as all living things reach for what gives them growth. She would get to her garden. Somehow. She would get there. The trial took place in the fall. The courtroom was small. Wood-paneled walls, high windows. Not many people. Lawyers, a few victims. Cromwell was in the back row with a folder on his lap. Alex came alone and sat by the aisle. Megan didn't come. She said it wasn't necessary, that it wasn't her story but the law's story, and the law would manage without her. Alex didn't argue. She always knew exactly what was necessary and what was not. Valerie entered the courtroom with the bailiffs. She had changed during the months of the investigation. Not broken, no. She wasn't the type to break easily. But something was gone. The confidence she wore like a piece of clothing had vanished. What was left was just an older woman with a straight back who had learned to look slightly past people to avoid meeting their eyes. She saw Alex immediately, looked at him for several seconds. He gave a short, smileless nod. Not a gesture of cruelty or forgiveness, just an acknowledgement. "You are here, I am here. We both know how this happened." Valerie's lawyer, indeed well known, indeed expensive, argued for a suspended sentence. Mitigating circumstances. Age, no prior convictions, partial admission of guilt. He spoke well, fluently, with the right citations of legal precedent. The judge listened, didn't interrupt, didn't stop him. When the lawyer finished, the judge opened the case file and began to page through it. He read in silence, for a long time, 5 minutes, maybe a little more. The courtroom was silent, that special judicial silence when everyone is looking at one person and waiting. The judge turned the last page, closed the folder, and looked at the courtroom over his glasses. 8 years. State prison. Restitution to the victims. The full amount of the established damages to be paid from the sale of seized assets. The lawyer wrote something down. Valerie stared straight ahead. Alex sat motionless, his hands on his knees. He didn't feel what he probably should have felt. Not relief, not bitterness. Just an end. The end of a long story he hadn't chosen, but which had happened to him. To them. As they led her away, she did look at her son one last time, briefly. He met her gaze, didn't turn away. After the trial, he went to the lake house alone. Not right away. First. He drove around the city for a long time, not thinking about the route, then found himself at Grand Central, and just bought a train ticket. He rode for an hour and 20 minutes, looking out the window at the autumn fields, withered, gray, some already harvested. October in the Northeast is always so beautiful and a little hopeless at the same time. The lake community was empty. The season was over. Most of the houses were closed up until next spring. His house now officially his. Arthur King had helped to transfer the title quickly and cleanly while Valerie was in custody, stood quiet, with bare apple trees and dark garden beds. He opened the gate, walked down the path, and sat on the bench by the apple tree. The same bench, the same spot. He sat and looked at the table he had brought out to the porch in May. The table was still there, empty, wet from the overnight rain. Above it, the bare branches of the apple tree, through which you could see the gray sky. Everything the same, and completely different. He thought about his mother. Not about what she had done, he had already thought about that many times and always came to the same conclusion. He thought about her as a person, about how she had lived, what she had wanted, what she considered right. She was a smart woman. That was the most terrifying part. Not stupidity, not weakness, but an intelligence directed the wrong way. An intelligence that decided the rules were for other people. That her accounts were more important than someone else's life, that the money of other people's retirees was just a resource. 8 years. She would get out, if she got out, as a very old woman. He didn't know if he would be around by then. He didn't know a lot of things. Right now, he didn't want to know. He just wanted to sit on this bench and breathe the October air. After a while, he took out his phone, opened his chat with Megan, thought for a moment, and typed 3 words. "It's over. Are you coming?" The reply came a minute later, 2 words. "On my way." He put his phone away, leaned back, and looked at the sky through the branches. Somewhere beyond the fence, a neighbor's door slammed. Someone else had come up, someone else who didn't want to be in the city on this day. Ordinary life. An ordinary October. You just had to wait. The following spring, in May, just like a year ago, there was a table under the apple tree in the yard again. The same table, the same benches, the same apple tree with the same white flowers on its outermost branches. Only the tablecloth was different, simple, cotton, without embroidery. Megan had bought it at a home goods store near their apartment, and saw nothing special in it. Just a tablecloth, just a table. 6 people were sitting at the table. Megan's colleague from the analytics department, Aaron, young, with his ever-present thermos. His wife, Alex's partner, David Bell, with his wife. David had never been to their lake house before, but now he had come with a cake and a bottle of wine, which he placed on the table with the air of a man who had been meaning to do something nice for a long time. And an old friend of Alex's, Sam, with whom he had studied in college and whom Alex hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Lives diverge, then they converge. That's how it always is. Ingrid wasn't there. Tony and Rachel weren't there. No one from that group was there. Not because anyone had forbidden it, it just happened that way. Different people, a different life. Sam was grilling. He had volunteered, said he knew how. And he really did. The meat was good, the coals were perfect. The smell hanging over the yard was that same one, from May, real. David Bell was telling a story about a construction bid they had almost lost 2 years ago. Funny, now it was funny. Aaron's wife was asking Megan about her garden. Alex looked at everyone in turn and thought. This is right. Not because it was beautiful or celebratory, but because it was just right. The conversation didn't stop, didn't hang in awkward pauses. It flowed easily on its own. The way conversations do among people who are comfortable together and don't have to choose topics deliberately. Someone remembered something funny, someone proposed a toast, a casual one, without pretense. Someone asked for the salt. David asked about the apple tree. Will it be a good harvest? And Alex replied that he didn't know, but there had been a lot last year, so they could hope. David's wife said she would make apple butter from them. Megan said, come back in September. It was a small conversation, the most ordinary kind, exactly what had been missing for a long time. Megan got up to get the kettle and, on her way back, stopped on the path. She looked at the gate. The quiet lane, the pine trees with their first green shoots, the empty road. The guard at the security gate was reading a newspaper. Alex noticed her gaze, stood up, walked over, and stood beside her. "No one's coming," he said quietly. She was silent for a second, then nodded. "I know." They returned to the table together. Megan poured tea, unhurriedly, for each person in turn. Aaron immediately wrapped both hands around his mug. He was always cold, even in warm weather. David accepted his with a nod. Sam, by the grill, turned and asked if there was any sugar. Alex got up and went to the porch for the sugar. An ordinary May evening, warm, quiet, without any special events. From beyond the gate, the sound of the wind in the pine trees, which you can only hear when the conversation at the table lulls. And in the far distance, the clatter of a commuter train, heading back toward the city. Some lake houses become free not when they are bought, but when someone else's fear finally leaves them. This property, with its apple tree, its old flagstone path, its greenhouse and bench by the fence, it became free in May, when a woman in a light-colored coat walked across it, and the heels of her shoes tapped out a clear, even rhythm. Not of triumph, not of revenge. Just the steps of a person who knows where they are going.